And we're live again. Welcome back. We are going to read you Mood Wings by Chernobog. It is described as follows. Mood Wings, observations on Pegasus body language. When Twilight Sparkle finds a book, she discovers an entirely new field of research. The secrets of Pegasus wings lie before her, and she insists on making her own observations on the matter. How? By doing field research, of course. The story is almost 10,000 words long. The estimate is an hour. So this is going to be a long story. It's going to be the longest story of the night. And here we go. Mood Wings by Chernobog. Were any pony to ask, they'd be shocked to the core. Their worldview would be shattered, their beliefs upturned. Everything they knew would be a lie. But it was true. Twilight had not read every book in her library. She was, admittedly, a fair bit into it. She was up to M, halfway through the alphabet, but merely a fourth through the library. She realized that eventually she'd run out. But that was one of the perks of being a librarian. She could always request more books to expand their repertoire. Sighing as she closed the book in front of her, Twilight tilted her head until she felt a satisfied crick. She really needed to find a better posture to read in. As she got up from her spot on the floor, her magic surrounded the reading material she had just finished. Mollusks and You, while brief, had been a fascinating read into some of the Equestria's fauna. The unicorn made a mental note to do a little research the next time she crossed paths with one. Quickly finding the right place in the shelf, she slid the book neatly against its companions and removed the next one. Twilight levitated the book towards herself, eagerly eyeing the blue cover. The drawing on front was relatively simplistic. A pair of Pegasus wings, folded, and the other one extended to its full length. The title on the other hoof offered more clues as to its contents of the book. Mood Wings, Observations on Pegasus Body Language, by Keen Eye. Cracking her neck once more, Twilight decided to settle down on her couch, easing out into a mildly more comfortable position as she started flipping through the pages, reaching the first block of text, the author's notes. Body language, as any pony will tell you, is fairly important. However, few truly realize how important it is that every situation imaginable. In a conversation, it can either reinforce or undermine the spoken word. In a more physical activity, it can reveal thoughts or emotion that are initially seem hidden. What most ponies don't know is that when body language makes up for 60 to 70% of all communication, eye movement, facial expressions, gestures, and body posture create a whole new layer in conversation that is often picked up subconsciously. True to my name, I've spent my life observing the common and uncommon pony, documenting all that I've discovered into my research. What you are reading now is the result of a decade of scrutiny into one of the three pony races, the Pegasus. While the unicorn and earth pony body language is quite similar, the differences being more a matter of accent rather than a barrier to communication, the Pegasus wings give them an entire new channel for body language, which often goes right over the head of ponies of the other two races. Indeed, this was traditionally one of the sources of friction between the three pony tribes before the founding of Equestria. Earth pony and unicorn representatives, seeing the Pegasus for the first time, often describe them as alien and overwhelming, while the Pegasus in turn considered the others wooden and unreadable. While regular contact between the subspecies has largely eliminated such feelings of alienation, there remains a wealth of information that most non-Pegasi never even realize they are missing. As I found out myself the hard way, with this book, I hope to close that gap and help my readers take the first step into the wonderful world of the Mood Wings. Chapter 1. The Wings Tell the Story. For millennia, unicorns have manipulated objects with their magic, allowing them a degree of control and finesse unmatched by any other race. The noble earth ponies have, over time, become dexterous in the use of their tails to grab things, as well as mastering riding, amongst other things, with the use of their mouth. All races have mastered this delicate art of balancing objects on their hooves, They are limber enough to grip certain things, but this tends to a lack of precision and control. It also occupies one of the limbs used to walk, which makes movement quite difficult. The Pegasi, however, are blessed with an entire extra set of appendages, allowing them a wide range of control and use depending on how skilled the Pegasus is with their wings. While lacking in finesse, in fine control of while lacking in the fine control of unicorn magics, wings have allowed Pegasus to grab not only the control of the skies, but manipulate nearly any object. These have also become a form of communication used both consciously and unconsciously by their bearers, providing a range of expressiveness more visible than any other race. In the next few chapters, I will be describing a few examples of common and uncommon expressions and meanings attached to the Pegasus display of their plumage. Twilight glanced up from the page as she heard the front door open. Raising an eyebrow as Spike walked into the library, carrying a large box of scrolls.
What are those, Spike?
The young dragon jumped at the sound of her voice, almost tipping the box over before catching it himself. He let out a sigh of relief at averting the minor disaster. Just some documents from the mayor's office. She said they're old enough to be put in the library archive. Twilight nodded as the young dragon set down the box near the couch, then walked over to the door.
Hang on.
Twilight nodded as the young dragon set down the box near the couch, then walked over to the door.
Oh, thank you. Where are you going?
She asked. Her assistant didn't usually shirk his duties by just plopping down the boxes randomly.
These still need archiving.
Spike stopped at the door, turning to Twilight with a guilty grin. Actually, Rarity asked me to help her go gem hunting again. She'll be waiting, so I gotta go now, bye. Twilight blinked as the door swung shut. Are you still with us?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I thought you were going to do the narration on this.
Yeah, but these are thoughts.
Oh. Sorry. Well, so much for not shirking duties.
Pulling herself off the couch, she opened the box and grabbed the closest scroll, carefully unrolling it as she noticed the time-worn look it bore. She skimmed through the document, discovering it was an old spending bill from the time of Ponyville's settlement. While fascinating in its own right, Moodwings had grabbed her interest and wasn't letting go. She put the document back in the box, and then levitating it and the book as she made her way to the basement, her muzzle buried in the pages. Chapter 2. Home Base. The wings at their rest. A Pegasus' wings, contrary to what I may have been leading you to believe, are not always moving. In fact, when they are not flying, Pegasi like to keep their wings relaxed against their sides. They are not exceedingly large or bulky, and even on a male Pegasus or a glorious Princess Celestia. While her majestic wings are much larger than the average ponies, this is a necessity due to her larger frame, but, as with any Pegasus, her wings fit snugly against her sides. At rest, wings add very little to her Pegasus' girth, remaining in a sense streamlined even when not flying. Even on the ground, Pegasi are creatures of speed and can run through the air with as much grace and ease as any earth pony or unicorn. Pegasus' wings are relatively short, covering only a portion of their sides up to the flank. Most importantly, the wings tend to cover part of the pony's cutie mark, partially obscuring it from view when not in use. A Pegasus cutie mark, most often relating to some way to flight, is thus on display when they are in their element, flying. When not flying, their cutie mark is almost considered unimportant, and it is hence hidden unless the wing is moving deliberately. Even cutie marks that do not display clouds, wings, or something easily understandable as belonging to the sky or speed will usually still remain related in some fashion to flight. Examples of this are flying animals, or displays of rain or other weather-related cutie marks. They are as varied as the ponies themselves, yet they always return to the Pegasus' normal element, the sky. As Twilight began turning the page to the next chapter, she failed to notice that she had arrived at the bottom of the stairs, crashed head first into an obstacle in the middle of this room. She rubbed her nose in irritation, thankful that the impact had been relatively minor, glaring at the offending object. It turned out to be the machine she had once attached to Pinkie Pie in an attempt to figure out the switches and combos. As Twilight picked up these fallen scrolls and started sorting them out, her eyes kept moving back to the machine, then to her current reading. It reminded her of what she'd done after the machine had failed. As she sorted the last scroll, Twilight made up her mind. This time, she'd leave her pith helmet at home and try to absorb more carefully and less obviously. That had been the major error of her method last time. One of the elementary rules of science was that subjects of an observational study can't know they're being studied, or they won't act naturally. And now it was time to study. In fact, it was time to do some field research. It was, thankfully, a bright and sunny day. She spotted a unicorn couple wandering down the street, chatting away merrily. A few earth ponies balancing a bag on their back, filled to the brim with what looked like Sugar Cube Corner's finest goods. And of course, more ponies meant more Pegasi to observe. Twilight decided to make her way towards the park. A day such as this was bound to have ponies in there in droves, which would allow her to watch in relative peace and quiet. With any luck, she'd find an unoccupied bench so she could continue reading. Her eyes flicked left and right, seeking out every pony that crossed their path, every Pegasus that bore the full brunt of her glance, as Twilight furtively studied the contour and shape of their wings. In the back of her mind, a niggling thought told Twilight that it might be rude, and that she should tone it down, but the voice was ruthlessly pushed to the side by the high eminent scientific research. This was thus far too interesting. Finally arriving at the park, she went over what she had observed so far. Many a wing, most of them relaxed and at rest, showing her... Twilight blinked, a hoof in the air, as she realized that she'd only really read one chapter. Its introduction had been fairly informative, and she devoured the rest of it in short order. But it had only covered the basics of a wing at rest and its relation to the Pegasus body. She needed to continue reading before being able to make the heads or tails of the data she was gathering. Spotting a free bench, the unicorn practically galloped towards it, eager to claim it in the name of reading. As she slid into the comfortable position, she levitated the book out of her saddlebags and began reading once more. Chapter 3. Poetry in Motion. The Wings in Flight. We now come to arguably the most important part of the Pegasus' life. Flight. Specifically, the movements of a Pegasus' wings during flight. As any scientific observer may see, the size of a pony's wings does not quite compare proportionally with many other creatures in the animal kingdom, begging the question as to how, in fact, a pony can fly. I will not go into much detail, as this has been the subject of many scientific papers and is documented in numerous tomes. Suffice to say, a Pegasus does not use their wings to move the air around them, but instead they interact directly with the ambient magic that suffices the entire world. In a similar way that they can stand on ephemeral clouds, their wings touch the magic and propel them forward, achieving greater speeds than any natural flying creature can hope to attain. To the outside observer, this may look identical to moving by pushing the air. For the purpose of this chapter, we will consider it the same. It does, however, allow the Pegasi greater aerial feats, as the Wonderbolts and their precursors have demonstrated over the years. Twilight's fascination with the subject increased with every word as she tore through the rest of the chapter. Soaking in the details about Pegasus wing movement during flight, with the full amount of detail covered in the book, she was bound to discern something from her casual observation. She glanced around, suddenly noticing that the light around her had gotten slightly darker. Not seeing anything in the immediate vicinity, she glanced upwards and finally discovered the culprit, a lone cloud wandering through the sky. But no sooner she had found the cloud than a voice rang out from above. "Sorry, Twi! Let me get that for you!" Twilight grinned as she watched Rainbow Dash fly up into the cloud, spinning it around the place, and a well-placed buck into the fluffy mass. Twilight thanked whatever good fortune had caused Rainbow's arrival. Not only did she get to see and chat with one of her best friends, that particular friend was exactly what she wanted to see right now, a Pegasus in action. It seemed like Rainbow Dash had noticed the attention and decided to give the unicorn a bit of a show. She sped through the sky, twisting and turning, blazing down a rainbow trail that she drew in every eye of the park. She finished her display with a series of tight corkscrews, then sped upwards until she seemed merely a speck in the sky. Once there, she started her dive, speeding towards Twilight with ever-increasing speed, vaguely worrying the librarian until Rainbow Dash pulled up to a full stop just above her. Giving a mock bow to the small crowd that had gathered, she finally touched the ground and trotted over to her friend. "Hey, Twilight! How's it going?" Twilight smiled as she inconspicuously set a book to the side. It wouldn't do to attract attention to it while she was gathering data.
Sorry. Just great. The weather's fantastic.
Rainbow preened at the comment. "Yep, you're welcome." She extended her wings, swelling with pride, until she noticed how Twilight's attention seemed not to be focused on her face, but on her wings. Rainbow Dash raised an eyebrow as she turned her wings to the side, and mentally shrugged. Twilight was probably just impressed. "So, Twilight, what you reading?"
Oh,
Twilight racked her brain for a suitable name, anything that would draw attention away from her research.
It's a book about birds. Horseflies. Flies.
She mentally smacked herself.
Is that really the best you could come up with?
Thankfully, Twilight was spared further embarrassment, as Rainbow Dash's face had acquired that familiar look of disinterest she'd gotten whenever Twilight started talking about interesting subjects. Where it would normally grate at her, right now she heaved with a sigh of relief. She was still safe, but just to be sure, she slid the book back into her saddlebags. "Yeah, that's great. Hey, do you know where Applejack is?" Rainbow Dash asked as she looked around the park. Twilight shook her head, a sly smile on her lips, as the swift change of subject. Since the two had been starting dating a few weeks prior, the farmer's name was always atop of the tips of Rainbow Dash's tongue.
"I haven't seen her today,"
she replied, sneaking some more looks at Rainbow Dash's wing. Unnoticed by Twilight, Rainbow's expression took on an air of confusion as the Pegasus glanced at her own wings, then back at the unicorn. "What? Is there something on my wings?"
No, it's, there's nothing. I mean...
Rainbow blinked and shook her head slightly. Well, if Twilight didn't want to talk about whatever it is, no skin off her snout. Oh wait, what? Never mind. Dang it, where is that mare anyway? She said she'd meet me here. I'm gonna go look for her. See ya, Twilight! Glancing one more time at her friend, Rainbow leapt into the air, heading towards the direction of Sweet Apple Acres. Now alone, Twilight sighed with her relief. That had been too close. She would have to be more subtle in the future. She wasn't a very good liar. She knew that. One determined Pegasus asking questions that could blow the entire study. So she'd have to make sure that they'd never even notice her looking. Still, she'd made some observations before the near disaster, and she grabbed her notepad out of her saddlebag, quickly jotting down a few things, then fished the book back out and starting on the next chapter. Unbeknownst to Twilight, Rainbow Dash was mulling over her best friend's actions, still confused. I wonder what that was about. She told herself it was nothing, but it kept sticking in her mind. Heh, it almost looked like she was... Nah, that couldn't be. Chapter 4. Grasping Concepts. The Prehensile Wing. One of the most interesting and perhaps most bizarre abilities of the Pegasus wings is its ability to be used to grasp objects. Unlike many other winged animals, the appendages can be twisted and turned with a fairly large degree of malleability, in effect resembling the claws or hands of another species, such as dragons or diamond dogs. While not an exceedingly widespread or common skill, it allows a Pegasus to handle items in a finer degree than any Earth pony, entirely skipping the need to use the mouth, except of course when the Pegasus is in flight. Hence, since most Pegasus spend most of their day in the air, many never develop this relatively complicated skill, preferring to use their mouth to handle most objects on both the ground and in the air. Such a display of wing malleability extends to the Pegasus' durability, since wings, in effect, handle magic to gain the ability to fly, and their bearers are constantly exposed to magical manipulation. As a result, Pegasus wings will demonstrate a remarkable tolerance against torque and stress. Only the greatest of strains, such as physical or magical combat or severe impacts, are known to damage a wing. On the subject of combat, this durability is one of the reasons why a large proportion of the Royal Guard and military forces are comprised of Pegasi. Their ability to fly is naturally the key to mobility, but the ability to manipulate their wings to a great degree has made the Pegasus an extremely versatile combat force. They can wield a weapon in hoof, mouth, and in wing. With this discipline and training, a soldier can employ their wing as weapons. While they cannot inflict as deep as wounds as a blade or other weapons might, wings are still a force to be reckoned with, and in the right circumstances can even be deadly. This is why a Pegasus combat force is considered just as capable as the Unicorn Division. This is all covered in far greater detail in Sun Flues, the art of wing combat. Wings might not be equal to the delicate manipulative abilities of a unicorn horn, but they are more versatile than one might imagine. Twilight lifted a hoof to her chin as she lifted the book back into her saddlebags. After her close encounter with Rainbow, she couldn't afford to be so obvious again. She needed to be stealthy, hidden. By bushes, yes! She'd hide in the bushes like she had done with Pinky, for all the good that had done. More importantly, she needed to find a subject who wouldn't notice her observations like her pink friend had. Twilight attributed it to Pinkie Pie's sense and her general weirdness, but she still needed a subject that was unsuspecting, innocent, quiet.
Fluttershy.
She jumped off her bench, eager to start her research with the new subject. As she left the park, her eyes kept wandering back to the various Pegasi walking and flying about, studying their wings as she went by. She grinned happily. This was all so fascinating. A short trip later, Twilight found herself hiding behind a tree. With a skill born from years of experiencing sneaking unnecessarily into the royal library, she inched closer to Fluttershy's cottage, leaping from one hiding place to another until she reached a spot that gave her the perfect vantage point into the Pegasus home, while hiding from Twilight's view. She readied her notepad and pencil as she peered past the leaves, hoping to catch a glance of Fluttershy as she busied herself in her home. Her patience was soon rewarded as she caught a glimpse of her friend through the window, displaying exactly what Twilight had come for. In her mouth, Fluttershy was carrying a bag of birdseed while balancing a tray on each wing with noticeable bounce or jostle. One held a teapot and a teacup, while the other tray held a bowl of salad. It seems like Twilight had caught her at lunchtime. Twilight's mouth started watering at the sight. Between her desires to finish mollusks and you, she ended up being so engrossed in moodwings she had completely forgotten to eat that morning. She shoved the thought out of her mind, intent on continuing to watch the other pony wings. Thankfully, Fluttershy was proving to be an absolute motherlode of information. She was handling her now filled cup with a hoof and a wing, with one of her thicker feathers slipped through the handles. The hoof held the cup upright, allowing the pony to sip at her leisure. Grinning wildly, Twilight's horns shone as she started to take notes.
Subject Fluttershy displays a very high level of control, from her ability to move individual primaries and secondaries to the strength and control of the wing itself. Subject has shown excellent wing stability, capable of... Oh, that salad looks tasty. No, focus. Of holding aloft objects without them tipping over or falling off.
She continued scribbling furiously, hardly noticing the bluebird to fly off from a nearby tree. Meanwhile, Fluttershy sighed contentedly, enjoying the taste of the tea. It was a blend she usually reserved for when Rarity came by after the weekly spa session, but she felt inexplicably daring today, and she decided to dip into her stash. If daring tasted this good, she might have to do it again. She felt a slight weight on her head and glanced upwards. A bluebird had landed on her head and started chattering quickly. Fluttershy's eyes widened as she listened, then glanced out her window. There, in plain sight, a purple horn stuck out from the bushes, shining with magic. She quickly turned away, not wanting to let Twilight know that she'd been discovered. Fluttershy didn't know why Twilight was watching her from the bushes, but this was Twilight, the smartest pony in town. She had to have a good reason. She was her friend, and she would explain in due time, right? Relaxing as she sipped her tea, Twilight thanked the bluebird, then dug into her salad. No sense in wasting a perfectly good meal by worrying, even if this was somewhat odd. Twilight herself glanced up as her stomach gave a low rumble. Thankfully, she didn't have to be disturbed anymore. She didn't seem to have disturbed any of the nearby wildlife and was still hidden. She sighed in relief, glaring at her stomach.
I really should eat,
she mused, her gaze settling once more on Fluttershy.
Well, maybe after a few more minutes of observation.
Chapter 5 to 8. Ocean of Emotion. Happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. Finally, we come to the most important part of this book. The language of wings. In other words, how they display the ranges of emotions a pony can feel, revealing or enhancing what is already visible by facial expressions or non-wing body language. These displays are actually not iron-cast rules for Pegasus expression. It is just as common for a Pegasus to keep their wings at rest while expressing an emotion as it is for them to use their wings. It can be considered an accent, or perhaps even a dialect that a young foal learns while growing up, and it varies slightly depending upon the Pegasus origin. With all the basic expressions remain the same, the angle of the wing, or a slight variance in feather direction, can show the difference between a Cloudsdale pony or one from Las Pegasus. In these chapters, I will cover quite a number of emotions that can be discerned from observation: happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. Twilight frowned as she approached the center of town, her confusion growing by the minute. She had finished reading the most informative chapters yet by the time she reached the town's outskirts, thankfully for her ability to walk and read with little trouble. But now that she was in town, taking mental notes as she watched passing Pegasi, they seemed to somewhat confuse her instead. Normally, when Twilight walked through town, she got little more attention than the occasional passing nod. She was hardly a social butterfly like Pinkie or even Rarity after all. Yet now, when specifically she wanted to go unnoticed, every Pegasus in town seemed to be paying attention to her. Some were giving her funny looks, others seemed to be deliberately avoiding her, and some had even accosted her, talking about the most inane of subjects, the price of vegetables, the latest gossip, nothing she was quite accosted with. What the hay was going on? Twilight sighed in relief, and she turned the corner, spotting her destinations. Horty's Cuisine, home to the best hay fries in town, a pretty mean daffodil sandwich, and currently occupied by a Wonderbolt.
Wait. Wonderbolt?
Twilight paused, her eyes open wide with shock. You couldn't be a friend of Rainbow Dash without hearing her many tales and stories about the Wonderbolts. She heard about them so often that she could identify them in her sleep, but she was wide awake, and staring at none other than Sorin. Even without his uniform, the wind-swept mane and the distinctive beauty mark made the Wonderbolt instantly recognizable, and a prime Pegasus specimen. Spurred on by the hunger gnawing at her stomach, she cautiously approached the restaurant while keeping an eye on the newest subject of her observation's wings. She was so focused on the wings that she never noticed as their owner glanced in her direction and grinned. She jumped as he cleared his throat, tearing her eyes off his wings as she looked at his face. The stallion gave her a winning smile, amusement twinkle in his eye. Hey there! She blinked and looked around. No, he was indeed talking to her.
Hello?
Care to join me for some drinks? Twilight felt the heat spread from her cheeks.
Did he just... No, I was just passing by.
She answered, flinching as her stomach let out another growl.
Sorry, I gotta go.
Soren blinked as she watched the unicorn run off, then shrugged. Mares? Meanwhile, Twilight's blush had finally faded as she once more found herself in the outskirts of town. She hadn't quite intended to run quite as far as she had, but she could still feel the stares of the Pegasus on her back, and Soren of all ponies. She felt a flush threaten to return as she thought of the stallion's obvious past. Maybe she'd better hold off on her field research for now. On the other hoof, she could head over to Sweet Apple Acres. Applejack was still willing to part with some apples, and that sounded delicious to Twilight right now. Plus, there was a high chance that both the farmer pony and Rainbow Dash were there on the farm, and her Pegasus friend would want to know that one of her heroes was in town. She trotted to the farm. Twilight enjoyed the scenery as she tended to do every time she took this path. As much hard work as it was to sustain the acres, Applejack was lucky to live on such a beautiful piece of land. The green grass and leaves, the brown wood, the red apples, the grey Pegasus on the road. Twilight's brain paused momentarily as she processed the last piece of information. There, walking down the path, was Derpy Hooves. She grinned and waved at the mail mare.
Hello, Derpy.
The Pegasus smiled, her wings flaring open, happy to see his friendly face.
Hey, Twilight, how are you? I'm doing fine, thanks.
Twilight replied, her eyes drifting once more towards the other Pegasus wings. She couldn't help herself.
Oh, is Stinky stopping by tomorrow for tutoring?
Derpy nodded, her wings fluttering at her side.
Oh, I know what that means.
Twilight beamed inwardly.
She's happy. Yep. Thanks again, Twilight. You have no idea how long it took to find a willing tutor for a young unicorn.
Twilight shook her head.
No problem. She's such a dear. It was my pleasure.
The rest of her phrase was drowned out by the loud growl from her momentarily forgotten stomach. Once again, Twilight's cheeks became bright red. Derpy giggled at the sound, her smile turning warm.
You know, I was just on the way to get some muffins. Care to join me?
The unicorn shook her head.
Thanks for the offer, but I'm in a bit of a rush. There's a Wonderbolt in town, and you know Rainbow'd never forgive me if I didn't tell her.
She rolled her eyes for emphasis. They both knew just how the speecher was when the subject came on. Derpy's wings dropped slightly at the refusal, but quickly lifted upwards once more.
Was that disappointment?
Twilight pondered, wondering why there was such a strong reaction.
Okay then, see you around.
The Pegasus waved farewell, using both a hoof and a wing.
Huh. Didn't read about that.
Chapter 9. Conundrums of Confusion. Uncertainty. The display of confusion deserves its own very small section for one reason. It is difficult to pin down, observe correctly, and deduce the meaning thereof. Slight changes in movement can mean the difference between such statements as, I am confused, and this worries or scares me, I am confused. This irritates, angers me, I am confused. But I don't really care, I am confused. And I find it amusing. These are a few examples, and the difference between them is very subtle. Only very close observation and skill will allow you to truly see the different shifting of the feathers combined with the rest of the body language. This makes confusion one of the hardest emotions to discern accurately. Shortly after parting company with Derpy, Twilight glanced upwards from her reading as she heard the sound of beating wings. There was Soren, speeding towards the distantly visible Cloudsdale. He had apparently noticed her too, giving his flying a slight flourish for his private audience, before waving as he sped off. The blush made yet another triumphant return.
Poor Rainbow.
she mused as she floated the book back into her saddlebags.
She'll have a fit when she hears you miss Soren.
Minutes later, she reached a fence surrounding the Apple home and trotted straight to the front door. Before she could knock, she heard a pair of familiar voices coming from the barn. There, she found the pair lounging on piles of hay, relaxing. And then "Oh, hey, Twilight!" Rainbow called at the unicorn as he appeared in the doorway. Applejack smiled at the new arrival.
Hey, Twa! What brings you around these parts? Oh, I was just in the area. Really?
The farmer asked, raising an eyebrow.
Farm's not exactly on the beaten path, you know. Oops. Yes, just taking a walk and found myself here. What's up with you girls?
Twilight asked, attempting to divert the conversation.
Apple bucking is done for the day, so I'm just taking a breather with Dashy here.
Applejack answered, giving the Pegasus a brief nuzzle. Twilight's eyes widened slightly as she watched. The display wasn't new, but the book was now giving a clear insight what she had lacked previously. Rainbow Dash was blushing, a goofy grin plastered on her face. But the wings told another story entirely. The signs were crystal clear to Twilight's keen eyes. Happiness was obvious, that little shudder moving from the base of Rainbow Dash's wings to the tip of her primaries. But she also saw how the wings curved towards the Earth Pony, almost cradling her.
Trust and contentment.
It almost took Twilight's breath away, seeing such a strong display of emotion. Rainbow was completely head over heels about Applejack. She continued watching the Pegasus wings, missing the occasional glance from Rainbow thrown her way. As her observation continued, she saw increasingly evident signs of confusion. Rainbow, for her part, wasn't sure how to feel. On one hoof, she was with her mare friend who was nuzzling her, and that was all sorts of awesome. On the other hoof, she was being watched, not in a Pinky usual "ah, that's cute" fashion, or Rarity's contemplative stare, or even Fluttershy's wide-eyed wonder, which they all thought of Rainbow hadn't noticed. No, Twilight's usual happy smile was absent. Right now she was staring at Dash. The Pegasus inched closer to Applejack, closing the remaining distance between the two. Okay, there's no mistaking it now, she thought. What the hey is going on? As Rainbow turned towards Twilight, opening her mouth to ask Twilight what she was doing, the unicorn interrupted her train of thought.
Oh, Dash!
Twilight said, abruptly remembering the reason she came here for.
You'll never guess what I saw in Ponyville today. Or rather, who.
Huh? Rainbow asked, startled at being the one questioned. I don't know. Who? Rainbow Dash and Twilight grinned wildly.
Soren.
Rainbow Dash's full attention focused on Twilight, her wings flaring outward in surprise. What? Where? Why? Twilight giggled at her friend's predictable reaction.
Eating at Hart's cuisine. He's gone now, though. Some like back to Cloudsdale,
she said, missing how Rainbow Dash seemed to sag in disappointment.
Was a bit weird, though.
Weird? Rainbow repeated.
Yeah, he invited me to go get some drinks with him.
You? What?
I turned him down, of course.
You what? Rainbow Dash sputtered, staring at Twilight. She abruptly turned to Applejack. AJ, can I be jealous? She asked, earning a slight frown from the farmer that was quite marred by the grin she was trying to hold back. Fine. Can I strangle her instead?
Hey!
Twilight cried, stepping back.
No, Rainbow.
But...
No hurting our friend, Dash. Thanks, Applejack.
Twilight said as Rainbow Dash muttered to herself. She blushed as her stomach made itself heard once more, earning a chuckle from the farmer.
Hungry much? A bit.
Twilight admitted, poking at the ground with a hoof. As her friends talked, the Pegasus stared daggers at the unicorn friend, jealousy burning through her. Yes, she had Applejack, but come on, a Wonderbolt, and she refused. Why would she? Oh, Rainbow paused. Oh, I see. Hey, Twi, sorry for yelling at you like that. There's pie in the kitchen if you want some, she offered, earning a glance from Applejack.
Really? Can I?
Twilight asked, beaming as the orange pony nodded.
Thanks, girls,
She said, rushing off. Once the unicorn was gone, Applejack turned towards Rainbow Dash, an eyebrow raised high.
So what was that for? All I could tell was that you were trying to get rid of her.
Oh, you noticed? Well, I think I know why she turned Soren down.
You mean besides the fact that she's a book-loving introvert who ain't ever had a date and wouldn't know what to do with one if she did?
Yeah. Besides that.
Oh? Well then spill.
Chapter 10. The Flight of Flight. The fight or flight. Displays of aggression. On the other side of the pony's subtlety spectrum lies aggression. This is an emotion that requires almost no explanation to detect. Wings are raised, spread to the maximum length and size, in an effort to look more imposing and large. This is reminiscent of animal behavior, where the creature will attempt to make itself look larger than it actually is to frighten off any other predators. In the case of Pegasi, it also allows them to quickly use their wings in either flight or combat. The latter is a remnant of more ancient times prior to the founding of Equestria. The Pegasus Society was a military state where every able-bodied pony was expected to serve time in the armed forces. Even now, generations later, and in times of peace, a Pegasus showing aggression is ready for battle. In short, if a Pegasus is ready to fight, it is very clearly visible. Applejack had argued against it, mentioning something about a breach of privacy and being insensitive, but she'd eventually given her own curiosity and let Rainbow Dash go. Hence, the Pegasus found herself hiding in a cloud, flying high above Twilight. Rainbow hoped the unicorn wouldn't notice that she was being followed, but Rainbow felt she had to. She had to find out if her suspicions were correct. Meanwhile, Twilight sighed contentedly as she trotted back to town, her stomach now full of delicious savory apple pie. Even though the day had taken a strange turn after meeting Soren, she couldn't feel bad about it. That pie had just been entirely too tasty. It was almost criminally good. So good, in fact, that it utterly distracted her from where she was going. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the taste, utterly oblivious to her surroundings, and nearly jumped out of her skin when she heard a loud yell. Yeah! Her eyes flew open, settling on a mountain in the shape of a white-coated, red-eyed stallion flexing in the street. And he had absolutely tiny wings. After reading the book, she now understood how it was able to fly with those minuscule, stunted wings, but she wondered if the marked difference in size changed anything in regards to language. She was so focused on his wings that she didn't notice the stallion's expression as she discovered what Twilight was looking at. What? What are you staring at? Twilight blinked, her gaze torn away from the wings.
Nothing.
The stallion just seemed to become angrier. Nothing? You think they're nothing? You think my wings are funny or something? By Celestia, those wings were small. She could definitely take something off the checklist. Size didn't affect the body language much. His wings showed clear aggression. However, not nearly as much as the pair of gray wings that now filled Twilight's vision.
What? Leave her alone, Royd. She didn't mean anything by it. Derpy?
She stood firm in front of Twilight, her wings tall and imposing, glaring up the stallion. Royd Rage didn't even know if it was her eyes or her pose, but something told him not to mess around with her. He nodded angrily and left without another word. Twilight sighed in relief, then jumped as the grey mare spun around, but instead of facing Twilight, she ended up facing the ground, having caught one leg on another and tripping herself.
Derpy, are you okay?
Derpy nodded as Twilight helped her up, grinning brightly.
Yep.
Then she glared at her treacherous legs.
Stupid things.
As Twilight brushed the dirt away from Derpy's mane, she heard a snicker from the sky. Glancing up, she found Rainbow perched on her cloud, seeming ready to jump off. Instead, she had a grin on her face. Twilight glared at her friend, having expected better from her than laughing at the expense of others. Then again, she mused, thinking back to her first meeting, it's nothing new. At least Twilight had this decency to look remorseful when she saw Twilight glaring at her. She turned back to Derpy, smiling gratefully.
Thank you for that. I don't know why he was so angry.
Derpy shook her head.
Well, his last name is Rage. Kinda makes sense, don't it?
She smirked, winking at Twilight. Her smile then softened.
Thanks, Twilight. For what?
The librarian asked as she finished off dusting Derpy.
For being so nice.
Derpy stepped closer to Twilight, shaking out her unreliable appendages. As she did, her wing brushed firmly against Twilight's back, coming into a rest against her cutie mark. Twilight shivered a bit at the touch. Still, given Derpy's sense of balance, she didn't mind being leaned on for a minute.
No problem,
she said, her cheeks heating up from the compliment. Above, Rainbow Dash jumped off her cloud, cackling to herself. She couldn't wait to tell Applejack. Twilight groaned as she flopped onto her couch, face first. The day had been far more hectic and exhausting than she had expected it to be. Light reading and casual observation had turned into a trip to all parts of town, gnawing hunger, Pegasus acting odd, and being yelled at. Weird wasn't even the beginning to cover it. Lifting her head off the cushion, she levitated the book out of her saddlebags, eager to keep reading. She was almost done with the book, and it would most likely get her mind off the day's events. Standing at attention, arousal. A note to the reader. The next chapter covers a subject not suitable for the younger audience. Please keep out of the hooves of foals. Perhaps one of the most interesting quirks of a Pegasus' wings is the display shown when expressing a keen sexual interest in another pony. Their wings subsequently jut upwards in a fashion that would almost be confused with aggressiveness. But the reality is quite the opposite. It shows an immense attraction towards another pony. This is not necessarily in a romantic sense, but a physical one. These displays are often completely out of the Pegasus' control, although with a mental and physical training, such displays can be suppressed to a certain degree. This is, however, the reason why Pegasus wings are flared when in the throes of passion. That is why restricting wings is a rather extreme defiance for a Pegasus, combined with the fact that it prevents one from basic aspects of flight. However, this is not a subject that will be covered in this book. For more details, see the Pony Sutra. The scientific term for this display would be erogenous alarm stiffening. But this is not a term commonly used by society. The most popular term is wing boner, but numerous synonyms and euphemisms exist. Pop feather, wing erection, popping a wingy, rigor eros, popping a pinion, flight firmness, a full sail, saluting the sky, reluctant advertising, bedroom turbulence warning, spontaneous wing stretches. These are the typical expressions that you will hear on the street or in casual conversation. Admittedly, a very casual conversation, as usually not a public one. This is only a partial list, as you can see. The names are numerous and often material for professional comedians. Most of them have drifted in and out of use as slang turns to evolve at an extremely quick pace, much faster than my research could keep up with, I am sad to say. The point is simple. Like many displays of Pegasus emotions, if they are interested in you, you will know. Fascinated, Twilight sped past the introduction, devouring the contents of the chapter. She had never thought to herself that interesting in such a subject, but discovered that such an overt display was so commonplace amongst ponies was eye-opening. As she reached the next chapter, she put the book down, feeling heat coming off her cheeks. Thankful that Spike wasn't back home yet, she trotted over to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. which it did wonders to cool her off. She snorted in amusement as she trotted back to the couch. If she had read this book earlier, she'd have seen the things between Applejack and Rainbow Dash ages ago. Rainbow Dash had made it plenty obvious to any pony who'd been looking for it. Sitting down once more, she began reading the final chapter. Epilogue. A brush of the eye. A brush of a feather. A personal account. This section will differ from the rest, as it will have no introduction, nor any detailed observation following it. Instead, it will simply be a little story. When I first started my observation of this topic, I met with some resistance. Over time, the Pegasus started to react in an adverse manner. They started to display nervous looks and often attempted to avoid me. Obviously, this was a hindrance to my research, and yet I did not know what the real problem was, nor what I was doing wrong, what I was doing to cause this type of reaction. A week later, I would finally get my answer. I found myself walking down the streets of Manhattan, continuously looking for subjects to watch. I had stumbled upon a Pegasus couple enjoying their day in the town. However, they did not react like the other Pegasi. Instead, the stallion came up to me, demanding why I was looking at his mare friend's wings. In my ignorance and slight fear, as this stallion was quite imposing and threatening, I stammered out that I wasn't looking at her wings, but at both their wings. This proved to be the wrong answer, as the stallion expression changed to disgust, and he proceeded to attack me, eventually knocking me out. I awoke what felt like hours later, but instead had simply been minutes, as I would later learn from my savior. She was a Pegasus mare with a deep green coat, shining blue eyes, and a rose mane. She had picked me up from the ground and propped the back of my head against her barrel, giving me a more comfortable position while I was unconscious. She explained that she had heard the shouting from her apartment. She glanced out of her window and rushed down to when the stallion started bucking. The couple had already left by the time she had arrived, but she had seen and heard enough to know what happened. She briefly ranted at the stallion, having had the misfortune of dating him a brief period of time. As she dragged me to her apartment to apply a plethora of bandages to me, she asked what possessed me to stare like that. Normally hesitant to explain, as subjects of observation do not act naturally if they know they are being observed, I decided this pony deserved to know, as she had and was still helping me out. It took her a few moments to stop laughing after I finished explaining, by which time I was starting to regret the decision. But what she told me next floored me. What I had believed to be an innocent watching, a simple observation, to a Pegasus, this means something else entirely. Amongst Pegasi, wings are considered a relatively personal body part, thus examining them with more than a passing glance is either very rude or an expression of unabashed interest, i.e. significant attraction to the pony you are attached to. Combining this with the fact that said stallion was, as she put it, a homophobic aggressive bully, his behavior became much clearer. Twilight paused in her reading, her eyes wide.
So, the entire day I've been... Oh, Celestia.
She buried her face under her hooves, her cheeks redder than ever.
That explains a lot.
Her mind wandered back over the day, the drink offer, the stares, the attempts at conversation.
Huh. So that's what a cheesy pickup line sounds like.
She then gasped as she remembered Rainbow's reactions.
I've made a huge mess. I've got to go apologize.
Her mind was still awash with the realization of what she had been doing. Her eyes fell on the remaining pages of the book. There was so little left. Still chuckling, Skydiver began to give me some more detail on Pegasus' body language. Her insight proved absolutely invaluable, filling in many holes that existed in early stages of my research. She became such an important source of information that she eventually became my research assistant. With her guidance, she helped clear the mystery I had set out to explain, and you can see her hoofwork in every chapter. While the introductions are purely my work, the finer details found in each chapter are the results of her joint observations, with most of the credit resting on her shoulders. I will now mention one final wing expression, one that changed my life forever. Staring at wings is an expression of interest. Wing boners are an expression of physical expression, but there is one thing missing in this list, a display of emotional attraction, showing that you care for the pony, in a deeper sense than simple physical attraction. Skydiver brushed her wing on my back, coming to a rest on my cutie mark. The tip of her feathers, normally resting on her own cutie mark, had now touched mine. I must admit I did not understand at first. As I always did when discovering a new wing expression, I asked her what it meant. I don't think I've ever seen her blush quite that much before or since, but eventually, through more blushing and eventual stammers, she asked me out for dinner, for a date. I had shared such thoughts with myself before, but I lacked the courage, and the non-verbal method of communication she had so aptly just displayed. I thanked the Pegasus ancestry for their warrior's courage, which she had clearly inherited. Of the two of us, she had taken the first step. I am happy to say the first date went quite well, and it was the first of many. A few years later, we eventually married. With that display, while the display was merely a question, it still makes a regular appearance in our shared lives. I see it now as one of the deepest expressions of emotions I have ever seen. It is heartfelt and powerful. My research, once my greatest passion, had opened the door to the love of my life, and for that I am eternally grateful.
Oh.
Twilight stared blankly at the last page. Her thought processed the ground to a firm halt. As the seconds ticked by, the gears in her mind slowly started moving up again.
I had no idea Derpy swung that way.
I told you! Twilight is totally into mares, Dash said, grinning. I thought it was just me, but Derpy was totally putting the moves on her. That's why she turned Troyan down. Applejack rubbed her chin deep in thought. Rainbow had practically bowled her over upon return, gushing with what sounded like gossip. But then she'd wielded some explanation out of the Pegasus and was beginning to understand what Rainbow Dash was talking about. Not only that, she had gained a deeper understanding of the Pegasus herself. She had never doubted the depth of Rainbow's feelings before, and she now had even less reason to.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up. I've been wondering what you've been up to with those wings of yours,
she said, grinning. Rainbow Dash blushed. She had never thought to explain, never thought that her love might not understand as well as she thought, but the subject broached, she opened herself to Applejack even further, and it felt great. She'd have to thank Twilight for that. She grinned as she leaned in closer to the orange pony, brushing Applejack's cutie mark with a wing. As the two leaned in closer, their lips nearly meeting in a kiss, a knock on the door startled them, shattering the mood. Grumbling, they trotted to the door and opened it to reveal a slightly disheveled Twilight.
Hang on. Dash!
Twilight gasped, slightly out of breath.
I'm sorry.
The Pegasus tilted her head, completely at a loss. Pardon?
I'm sorry.
For what, Twi? Oh, voices.
For what, Twa?
Applejack interjected, just as lost its rainbow.
Can we sit down?
Twilight asked, hesitant.
It's a bit of a long story. And that's why I was staring like that. Sorry.
Twilight finished, turning the now empty glass of water in her hooves. Rainbow Dash, even in her ever-understanding manner, was lying on the floor, rolling in laughter. Even Applejack had to fight to keep a grin off her face. Rainbow Dash wiped a few tears from her eyes as the giggles subsided, ignoring the unicorn's glare. That is just so like you to go staring before you even finish the book, she said, attempting to hold back even more giggling. I guess I was just wrong about her and Mares, Rainbow Dash thought. She should have known better. She waved, she waved the apology away. Don't worry about it. No harm done. Twilight sighed in relief and put the glass on the table.
I should get going.
Applejack tilted her head.
Leaving so soon, Twa?
Twilight nodded, smiling.
Yep. I think I'm gonna go get some muffins with Derpy,
She said, and left. Rainbow Dash stood staring at the spot the unicorn had just occupied, her mouth hanging open. Or not. Huh. You think you know a pony. Afterward, the next frontier. In closing, I hope you enjoyed this book. It was a great journey of discovery for me, and I hope you find yourself enriched by reading it. I hope it helps you understand the Pegasi better. There's a treasure trove of body language and expression, and there's a good reason why some of the best actors are Pegasi after all. Don't just stare too hard, okay? Look out for my next book, targeted at Pegasi, where I will focus on an entirely new field, non-wing based body language. Once again, thanks to my ever faithful skydiver.
And so,
Twilight wrote.
a true friend is one who trusts you to have a good reason, rather than leaping to conclusions, though forgiving you afterwards with only a minimum ridicule is a decent second best.
She finished that line with a wry grin, which turned smooth into a wide smile as she continued.
In related news, I'm pleased to say I found a whole new fascinating avenue of friendship research, which I expect to be reporting in on my next several letters.
She paused for a moment, suckling on her quill. With a blush, she added an extra line.
As a result, I believe I will pen those letters myself, rather than dictating them to Spike.
Finishing off the letter with her trademark signature, she carefully rolled it up and sealed it before placing it on the outbox for later flaming. With a sigh, she collapsed in a comfy chair next to her favorite bookshelf.
It's been one heck of a day,
She thought, eyeing the empty gap in the M section. While she certainly wasn't complaining about the results, it would still be a relief to move on from the tumulus tome. She reached out with her magic. While she couldn't put mood wings back, Applejack had borrowed it. It still felt quite soothing to be starting on a new topic. Moon, sun, and stars. A history of equestrian cosmology.
Well, sounds like it should be fascinating. And pleasantly calm. Read. I've had enough major revelations for the next month.
And so, with a content smile, she settled in for a good long read.
Princess Luna did what?
Celestia stared at the letter, as if willing to change. Yet the words, the implications, remained steadfast. Enough! I have no time for this. Luna, I'm heading off to Ponyville immediately. You're in charge until I get back.
What hast thou so worried, sister?
I believe my faithful student may have begun studies in a field I have not adequately prepared her for.
Which field of study is that, sister?
Dating.
Oh. Oh dear.